Good evening, Seekers. Tonight, in the 5th chapter of our 3rd book, we travel east from Mesopotamia toward a civilization that built some of the ancient world's most carefully planned cities and left behind one of its deepest silences. Across the plains and river systems of what are now Pakistan and northwestern India, communities raised brick houses, opened workshops, measured goods with remarkable consistency, and guided water through wells and covered drains. Their cities were large and connected to distant lands, yet the voices of the people who lived within them remain beyond our reach. They carved short lines of signs onto seals, pottery, and small objects, but no one has learned how to read them with certainty. The civilization is often called the Indus Valley civilization, though its settlements extended far beyond the valley of a single river. Harappa and Mohenjo-daro became its most famous cities, but they belonged to a wider world of towns, villages, fields, and roads spread across an enormous region. During its mature urban age, beginning around the middle of the 3rd millennium before the Common Era, patterns appeared again and again across great distances. Bricks followed familiar proportions. Weights were shaped according to shared standards. Seals carried animals and compact rows of symbols. Streets were laid out with a degree of care that still feels striking in the exposed foundations today. This civilization does not speak to us in the same way as Egypt or Mesopotamia. No long royal inscriptions have been recovered. No surviving epic explains how its people understood creation, death, or the gods. Archaeologists have not found obvious palaces or royal tombs comparable to those of neighboring civilizations, and no named king stands at the center of its history. The cities remain visible, but the people who directed them are hidden. We can follow the walls of their homes and the channels beneath their streets, but the names they gave themselves have disappeared behind an unread script. That silence has encouraged generations of speculation. Some have imagined peaceful cities without rulers, while others have searched for lost priesthoods, vanished kingdoms, or sudden disasters. The ruins demand more patience. They reveal a society capable of organizing labor, maintaining standards, moving goods, and building urban systems across centuries, but they do not offer a simple explanation for how authority worked. Their order may have depended upon merchants, councils, religious institutions, local leaders, or forms of power that left no single throne behind. The story begins long before the great cities. Farming villages had taken root in the wider region thousands of years earlier, and generations learned how to cultivate crops, herd animals, shape pottery, and exchange materials across long distances. Slowly, settlements grew more connected. Crafts became more specialized. Trade carried stone, shell, metal, timber, and ideas between landscapes. By the time Harappa and Mohenjo-daro reached their height, the civilization around them had inherited a deep history of adaptation. Its people lived with rivers that gave life, but could also change course, flood, or leave old channels dry. Water entered the city through wells and left through carefully constructed drains. Houses were often arranged around private courtyards, creating quiet interior spaces behind brick walls. Workshops produced beads, pottery, tools, ornaments, and seals whose designs traveled with merchants. Caravans and boats connected the Indus world with regions to the west, where Mesopotamian tablets may have remembered it under the name Meluha. After about 1900 before the Common Era, the old urban pattern began to change. Large centers declined, building traditions shifted, long-distance trade weakened, and populations moved toward different regions. The transformation was gradual and uneven, not the sudden disappearance once imagined. Climate, changing rivers, economic disruption, and local pressures may all have played a part. The civilization did not simply vanish because people continued living, farming, building, and carrying traditions forward. What faded was the urban system that had joined much of the region together. Tonight, we will walk through that silent world carefully. We will follow the rivers that sustained it, enter the streets of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, examine the wells, drains, seals, weights, and workshops its people left behind, and listen for meaning in signs that remain unread. We may never know the names of those who crossed those streets at dawn, but their cities still preserve the shape of their lives. In brick, water, and measured space, a civilization without a surviving voice continues to speak. Section 2. The cities of the Indus world rose within a landscape shaped by water that was never entirely still. Rivers crossed the plains in broad channels, divided into smaller branches, flooded their banks, and sometimes abandoned one course for another. To the people who lived there, water was not simply part of the scenery. It determined where fields could be planted, where cattle could graze, where villages could endure, and where roads and boats could carry goods between distant settlements. The land could appear generous, but its generosity depended upon rhythms that shifted from year to year. The Indus itself gathered water from mountain snow, glaciers, rain, and the rivers that joined it along the way. Farther east, other river systems spread across the plains, some powerful and permanent, others more uncertain. Ancient settlements appeared along channels that are now reduced, redirected, or dry. Over thousands of years, the courses of these rivers changed as floods deposited silt and pushed water into new paths. A town built beside a dependable channel might later find itself facing a shrinking stream, while another region could become newly fertile after the river moved across the plain. Above this watery landscape was the monsoon. Seasonal winds brought rain from the ocean, feeding crops and replenishing streams, but the strength and reach of those rains were never perfectly reliable. A strong monsoon could renew the land and fill reservoirs. A weak one could leave fields dry and force people to depend more heavily upon wells, stored grain, and river water. The people of the Indus region learned to live between these sources, using winter crops in some areas, summer rains in others, and local conditions that differed across the enormous territory connected to the civilization. This diversity is important because the Indus world was not one uniform valley. It stretched from coastal settlements near the Arabian Sea to inland plains, desert edges, foothills, and regions where seasonal rivers carried water only part of the year. Communities adapted to the places around them. Some depended upon farming on floodplains renewed by silt. Others raised animals across drier ground or worked near coasts where fish, shell, and sea trade became part of daily life. The cities later shared standards and symbols, but the civilization beneath those connections grew from many local landscapes. The rivers also created movement. Boats could carry heavy goods more easily than carts moving across rough ground, and waterways linked fields, villages, workshops, and larger towns. Timber, grain, clay, stone, and finished objects traveled along routes that had been used for generations. Even when direct evidence for every journey has vanished, the materials found in distant settlements reveal that people were not isolated. A bead made from stone brought from far away, or a shell ornament discovered deep inland, carried the memory of many hands and many miles. Yet the same rivers that supported life could unsettle it. Floods entered settlements, damaged walls, filled streets with mud, and forced people to rebuild. At Mohenjo-daro, repeated construction raised parts of the city over older levels, suggesting a long struggle against changing ground and accumulated debris. Flood deposits appear in parts of the archaeological record, though they do not tell a single simple story of destruction. The people returned, repaired, altered walls, and continued living. Their cities were not built once and left untouched. They were renewed again and again in response to a landscape that would not remain fixed. The slow movement of water may also help explain why the civilization later changed. Long after the great cities reached their height, rainfall patterns weakened in parts of the region, and some river systems became less dependable. Communities did not all respond in the same way. Some remained near old centers, while others moved towards smaller settlements or regions where water was more reliable. The shift unfolded across generations, too slowly to resemble a single catastrophe, but deeply enough to alter the urban world. Before the brick streets, seals, drains, and workshops, there was this older relationship between people and water. Every field planted beside a river required judgment. Every settlement depended upon knowledge carried through seasons of flood and drought. The cities of the Indus were remarkable, but they were not separate from the landscape around them. They were built from its clay, fed by its rivers, tested by its changes, and shaped by a long human effort to make life endure where water gave everything and promised nothing. Section 3. Long before Harappa and Mohenjo-daro became great cities, the wider Indus region was already home to communities that had spent thousands of years learning how to remain in one place. Their world was not empty ground waiting for civilization to arrive. It was a landscape of villages, fields, grazing routes, and exchange networks that slowly gathered strength across generations. The habits that later supported urban life began in quieter places, where families learned how to work the soil, care for animals, store food, and build homes sturdy enough to survive more than a single season. One of the earliest places to reveal this long beginning is Mehrgar, near the passes connecting the plains with the highlands to the west. There, people were farming and herding by the 7th millennium before the Common Era. Their houses were built from mud brick and divided into rooms for families, tools, and stored grain. Wheat and barley were cultivated, while cattle, sheep, and goats became part of a settled economy. These changes did not happen at once, and they did not erase older ways of living. Hunting, gathering, herding, and farming continued beside one another as people adjusted to the land. To plant a field was to place trust in the future. Seed had to be saved rather than eaten. Ground had to be prepared before the harvest could be imagined. Families needed enough food to survive until the next crop ripened, and failure could not always be corrected by moving elsewhere. Storage became one of the foundations of settled life. Grain protected inside a house could carry a family through a difficult season, support work beyond the fields, or become something exchanged with neighbors. A surplus was more than extra food. It was time held in reserve. As villages endured, craft knowledge deepened. Clay was shaped into vessels that could hold water and grain, while stone was worked into blades, grinders, and tools suited to farming and household labor. Beads and ornaments appeared in materials brought from beyond the settlement, showing that early communities were connected to wider routes of exchange. A small object worn at the neck could carry stone from distant hills, shell from a far coast, or the labor of a craftsperson the wearer would never meet. The dead were also given places within these settlements. Burials sometimes included ornaments, tools, or offerings, suggesting that memory and belonging were already being shaped through ritual. A village was not only a collection of houses, it was a place where generations accumulated, where children grew beside the graves of those who had lived before them, and where the land became tied to family history. Remaining in one place changed the meaning of home. The ground held not only crops, but ancestors. Over time, settlements became larger and more varied. Some households produced more pottery, beads, or tools than they needed for themselves. Others may have managed herds, fields or exchange more effectively. Specialization did not suddenly create cities, but it encouraged dependence. A skilled craftsperson relied upon farmers for food, while farmers depended upon others for tools, containers, ornaments, or access to distant materials. The village became a web of relationships that no single household could sustain alone. The movement of people and objects helped spread styles and practices across the region. Pottery designs changed, building methods were adapted, and familiar forms appeared in settlements, separated by long distances. These similarities did not mean that every community answered to one ruler or followed one plan. They suggest something slower. People were watching one another, borrowing useful ideas, and participating in networks that gradually made the region more connected. By the 4th millennium before the Common Era, some settlements had grown into substantial towns. Streets, workshops, walls, and storage areas became more organized. Craft production increased and exchange reached farther. Yet the mature Indus cities were still generations away. The people building these towns could not know that their descendants would create an urban system across an enormous territory. They were solving immediate problems, repairing homes, raising children, tending animals, and preparing fields as their parents had done before them. The cities that followed were not sudden miracles. They were the result of countless small decisions repeated over centuries. Every brick rested upon an older tradition of mud construction. Every storehouse depended upon earlier knowledge of preservation. Every workshop inherited skills refined in village hands. Before the first great streets were laid out, the foundations of the Indus world had already been built in fields, courtyards, and quiet settlements where people learned that a community could remain, grow, and remember. Section 4. By the middle of the 3rd millennium before the Common Era, the long experiment of village life had begun to take on a new scale. Across the Indus world, settlements that had grown slowly for generations entered a period of striking coordination. Bricks appeared in familiar proportions from one place to another. Weights followed shared measures. Seals carried recognizable animals and compact lines of signs. Streets, wells, workshops, and storage spaces were arranged with a consistency that suggests more than imitation. Yet the authority behind that consistency remains difficult to see. There was no single monument announcing the birth of the city. Instead, the urban system emerged through patterns repeated across a vast landscape. Harappa became one of the clearest expressions of this transformation. Built near the Ravi River, it stood within a fertile region connected to fields, villages, and routes of exchange. The settlement had existed long before its mature urban phase, but over time, its layout became more formal and its scale more ambitious. Raised areas supported important structures, while lower neighborhoods spread beyond them. Substantial walls marked sections of the city, though their purpose may have included protection from flood, control of movement, or the separation of particular districts. The ruins reveal a city shaped through repeated rebuilding rather than completed in a single plan. To enter Harappa would have been to move through a world shaped by brick. Mud brick formed the mass of walls, while fired brick was used where strength and resistance to water mattered most. Houses faced streets and lanes, often turning private rooms inward around courtyards. Doors were placed with care, and windows rarely opened directly onto the busiest roads. The design protected the interior, creating spaces where families cooked, worked, stored goods, and escaped the dust and movement outside. The larger urban order depended upon people whose names are lost. Brickmakers gathered clay, shaped it, and fired selected batches in kilns. Laborers raised walls and repaired drains. Builders kept streets aligned and dimensions consistent. Craftspeople worked where heat, smoke, water, and raw materials could be managed. Merchants brought stone, shell, metal, timber, and food from beyond the city. Farmers in the surrounding countryside supplied grain and animals to people who no longer spent every day producing their own food. Harappa could exist only because the city and its hinterland remained bound together. Shared standards made that relationship more reliable. A brick produced in one district could fit a wall built by another crew. A weight used in Harappa could be understood by a merchant elsewhere. Measures reduced argument and allowed exchange to move beyond personal trust. The remarkable feature is not simply that standards existed, but that they remained recognizable across such a broad region. Something encouraged distant communities to participate in the same practical language. Yet Harappa does not offer an obvious center of royal power. Archaeologists have not uncovered a palace that clearly dominated the city, nor a royal tomb filled with wealth and inscriptions. Large structures existed, but their functions are debated. Some may have been used for storage, administration, gatherings, or craft activity. The absence of a visible throne does not mean the absence of hierarchy. Organizing labor, controlling materials, maintaining standards, and managing important spaces all required authority. The mystery lies in how that authority was expressed. Power may have been distributed among several institutions rather than gathered around one king. Merchant families, religious specialists, landholders, or councils may have shared control. Leadership may have been presented through civic order instead of colossal statues and royal inscriptions. The city's quietness may therefore be misleading. A society can be highly structured without leaving one ruler carved above everyone else. Harappa belonged to a network rather than standing alone. Smaller towns and villages surrounded it, contributing food, labor, materials, and local knowledge. Roads and river routes linked the city with distant settlements, while objects moved farther than most individuals ever traveled. The urban system was a web of dependence, strengthened by repeated exchange between city and countryside. As Harappa grew, it demonstrated what the Indus civilization had become capable of creating. Its bricks, weights, streets, and seals belonged to a common order visible across hundreds of miles. Whatever form its government took, it persuaded thousands of people to build within the same system and keep that system working across generations. In that achievement, Harappa became one of the foundations of the silent urban world we are only beginning to enter. Section 5. If Harappa revealed the scale of the Indus urban system, Mohenjo-daro revealed its discipline. Built on the lower Indus plain, the city rose in a region where floodwater could nourish the land and threaten everything upon it. Its modern name means roughly the Mound of the Dead, but the people who lived there would have known it by another name now lost. What remains is a city without its original voice, preserved through brick foundations, streets, wells, drains, courtyards, and repeated rebuilding. From above, Mohenjo-daro appears ordered. Major streets run along broad lines, while smaller lanes enter neighborhoods of brick houses and workshops. This has often encouraged the image of a city designed all at once according to a perfect plan, but the ruins suggest something more patient. The city changed across generations. Walls were repaired, floors were raised, drains were replaced, and new buildings stood upon older remains. Order did not come from one finished design. It came from the repeated decision to preserve a pattern while the city continued to grow. The settlement was built upon elevated mounds that helped separate important areas from the surrounding plain. One high mound contained structures later called the citadel, though the name can mislead because no clear royal fortress has been found there. Nearby districts contained dense residential blocks, streets, and working spaces. The difference between these areas suggests organization, but not the kind announced by a palace or giant royal statue. Mohenjo-daro seems to have expressed authority through construction, access, and maintenance rather than through the visible presence of a named king. Its houses varied in size, revealing differences in wealth and status, but many followed similar principles. Rooms opened toward interior courtyards where light and air could enter without exposing the household directly to the street. Cooking, craftwork, storage, and family life could unfold within these protected spaces. Some homes had upper stories reached by staircases, while others included private washing areas connected to drains. The outer walls often appeared plain, giving little away to those passing outside. The city presented one face to the street and another to the people who lived within it. Movement through Mohenjo-daro would have been shaped by shade, brick, dust, and sound. Carts rolled along wider roads. Animals passed between people carrying baskets, jars, tools, and bundles of material. Craftspeople worked stone, shell, copper, clay, and faience. Kilns produced heat and smoke. Traders moved through neighborhoods where goods could be weighed, sealed, stored, and exchanged. Children crossed courtyards and narrow lanes, while water carriers drew from wells within houses or close to public routes. The most famous structure in the city is the Great Bath, a carefully built rectangular pool set within a larger complex. Fired bricks were fitted closely together, and waterproofing helped keep water from escaping. Steps descended into the pool from either end, while surrounding rooms may have supported preparation, changing, gathering, or ritual. Its exact purpose remains uncertain, but the care invested in its construction suggests that bathing there carried meaning beyond ordinary cleanliness. Water may have been connected to ceremony, purity, community, or authority. Nearby buildings have been described as halls, granaries, or administrative spaces, though many of those labels remain debated. The danger is that modern names can make uncertain ruins appear more familiar than they really are. A large brick platform is not automatically a palace. A row of rooms is not automatically a warehouse. The people of Mohenjo-daro organized space according to needs we can partly recognize, but the absence of readable texts prevents the buildings from explaining themselves. What can be seen clearly is the city's commitment to maintenance. Streets had to be kept passable, drains had to be cleared, wells had to be repaired, brick walls weakened by water, and time had to be rebuilt. This work required more than individual effort. It required shared expectations and coordination strong enough to continue across generations. The order visible in Mohenjo-daro was not only architectural, it was social. The city, therefore, leaves us with a strange impression. It is easy to enter through its streets because the practical details feel familiar. Homes, bathing places, lanes, workshops, and wells all belong to recognizable human needs. Yet the larger system remains hidden. We do not know what ceremonies filled the Great Bath, who decided where walls would rise, or how disputes over water and property were settled. Mohenjo-daro is one of the ancient world's clearest cities and one of its deepest mysteries, a place where daily life remains visible while the structure of power stays just beyond understanding. Section 6. Water shaped nearly every part of life in Mohenjo-daro, and the city's builders treated it with a seriousness that still feels unusually modern. In a hot river plain where dust, heat, seasonal flooding, and crowded neighborhoods placed constant pressure on daily life, access to clean water could not be left to chance. Wells were built throughout the city, some serving several households and others belonging to private homes. Their circular walls were formed from carefully fitted bricks, rising course by course around shafts that reached toward the water below. To draw from one of these wells, was to depend upon engineering so common that it had become part of the city's rhythm. The number of wells is striking. Water did not have to be carried from a distant river each time it was needed. It could be raised within neighborhoods, courtyards, and houses, reducing the distance between the source and the people who used it. Families could drink, cook, wash, and work without crossing the entire city. Craftspeople could use water close to their workshops. The presence of so many wells suggests not only technical knowledge, but an expectation that access should be woven into urban life. Water entering a house was only half the problem. It also had to leave. Many homes contained bathing platforms made from tightly laid bricks, often sloped, so that used water flowed toward a drain. From there, it passed through channels built into walls or beneath streets. Some drains were covered with removable bricks or stone slabs, allowing them to be opened and cleaned. Others led into larger street drains or into jars and soak pits where solids could settle before the water continued onward. The system was not identical everywhere, but it reveals an effort to manage wastewater rather than simply throw it into the road. This attention to drainage changed the experience of the city. In a dense settlement, standing water could turn lanes into mud, damage walls, attract insects, and make narrow streets difficult to use. Wastewater left unmanaged would have collected beside homes and workshops. By guiding it through channels, the builders protected both movement and construction. The drains also show that urban order depended upon maintenance. A blocked channel could affect several households, and a damaged section beneath a street required repair. The system survived only if people continued clearing and rebuilding it. The private bathing spaces found in many houses suggest that washing held importance beyond rare public ceremony. Some platforms were small and practical, while others were more carefully finished. Water could be poured over the body and carried away without flooding the room. The arrangement offered privacy and reflects the inward design of Indus homes, where daily life unfolded around courtyards rather than directly before the street. Cleanliness may have been practical, social, ritual, or all three at once. Without readable texts, the meaning cannot be separated neatly. The Great Bath stands at the larger end of this same relationship with water. Its careful brickwork, waterproofed surfaces, descending steps, and surrounding rooms suggest controlled access and repeated use. Water had to be brought in, retained, and removed without damaging the structure. The effort required to build and maintain it implies that shared bathing or immersion mattered to the community that used it. Perhaps people entered the water before ceremonies, during gatherings, or as part of practices whose names have disappeared. What remains is the architecture of intention. Yet, the water system of Mohenjo-daro should not be mistaken for a modern network. There was no single mechanical system pushing water through pipes to every room, and not every drain carried waste far beyond the city. Some channels emptied into local pits, while others required frequent cleaning to remain useful. The achievement lies not in pretending the city possessed technology it did not have, but in recognizing how consistently water management had been built into homes, streets, and public spaces. This consistency required knowledge shared across generations. Brick dimensions had to fit the channels they formed. Builders needed to understand slope, flow, access, and repair. Households had to connect private spaces to larger systems without weakening walls or blocking streets. The city's waterworks were therefore not only technical objects, they were agreements made visible in brick. In a civilization that left no readable account of its rulers, water offers one of the clearest signs of what its people valued. They built cities where ordinary life was shaped by wells within reach, bathing spaces within homes, and drains beneath the streets. Their monuments did not rise only upward toward the sky, Some of their most remarkable achievements ran quietly downward, carrying water through the hidden body of the city. Section 7. Behind the brick walls of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, most of life unfolded far from the grand questions that now surround the civilization. People woke in houses arranged around courtyards, prepared food, repaired tools, tended children, and carried water from nearby wells. The city may appear silent to us, but it would not have felt silent to those who lived there. Grinding stones scraped against grain, carts creaked along the streets, animals called from enclosed spaces, and hammers struck copper in workshops where heat and smoke gathered beneath open roofs. The inward design of many houses created a world protected from the busiest streets. Courtyards brought light into rooms that might otherwise have remained dark, and they gave families space to cook, work, wash, and gather away from public view. Some houses were modest, while others contained several rooms, staircases, and private bathing areas. The differences suggest that wealth was unevenly shared, yet smaller homes still belonged to the larger order of the city through familiar bricks, drains, lanes, and wells. Food connected the household to the countryside beyond the walls. Wheat and barley remained important, while pulses, sesame, dates, and other crops varied across the wider region. Cattle, sheep, goats, and water buffalo provided food, hides, traction, and fuel. Fish and wild foods remained part of life where rivers, marshes, and coasts made them available. Meals depended upon season, location, and household means, but every bowl rested upon work extending from field and herd to storage jar, grinding stone, and hearth. Within the city, craft production turned raw material into objects used across society. Potters shaped vessels for cooking, storage, transport, and ceremony. Some were plain and practical, while others carried painted designs formed through traditions repeated across generations. Copper and bronze became blades, tools, mirrors, ornaments, and small vessels. Shell arrived from distant coasts and was cut into bangles or decorative pieces. Stone was drilled and polished into beads, whose precision still reveals extraordinary patience. Among the most admired products of the Indus world were beads made from carnelian, a reddish stone that could be heated to deepen its color. Craftspeople cut the stone, shaped it, polished its surface, and drilled narrow holes through pieces that might be only a few centimeters long. The work required control, specialized tools, and knowledge passed from experienced hands to younger ones. A finished bead could move through a merchant's bag, appear in a wealthy household, or travel westward into Mesopotamia, carrying with it the skill of a workshop whose name has disappeared. Faience added another kind of color made from crushed materials treated so that the surface developed a bright glaze when fired. It could be shaped into beads, bangles, small vessels, and ornaments. Its blue-green appearance may have given it special value in a world dominated by earth tones, brick, wood, and cloth. The objects were small, but they transformed bodies and households through color, marking status or meanings now lost. Textiles formed another large part of daily work, though cloth rarely survives in the ground. Spindle whorls, needles, impressions, and occasional fibers reveal the spinning and weaving that must have occupied many hands. Cotton was used in the Indus region earlier than in many other parts of the ancient world, and finished fabric may have become an important trade good. The production of cloth required time that archaeology can easily overlook. Fibers had to be cleaned, spun, woven, dyed, cut, repaired, and eventually reused. Children learned these routines by living among them. They watched adults shape clay, grind grain, draw water, bargain, carry loads, and prepare animals for work. Small clay carts, figurines, animals, and wheeled toys suggest play. though some may also have carried ritual or teaching purposes. A child rolling a toy cart through a courtyard belonged to the same urban world as the merchant weighing stone or the builder clearing a drain. Civilization was renewed not only through monuments, but through imitation. The homes and workshops of the Indus cities remind us that urban order existed to support ordinary life. Streets mattered because people moved through them. Drains mattered because households produced water and waste. Weights mattered because goods were exchanged. And wells mattered because someone had to drink. The civilization's greatest mystery is not that it built cities, but that the people inside those cities remain almost anonymous. Their names are gone, yet the marks of their hands survive everywhere, in polished beads, worn thresholds, broken pottery, and rooms where families once lived close enough to hear one another through the walls. Section 8. Trade carried the Indus cities far beyond the walls that contained them. A merchant leaving Harappa or Mohenjo-daro entered a network of villages, river routes, coastal ports, and distant markets where goods changed hands many times before reaching their destination. Stone from one region became beads in another. Shell gathered near the sea appeared in inland workshops. Copper moved from mountain lands toward cities where craftspeople shaped it into tools and ornaments. The civilization's unity was visible not only in its streets and bricks, but in the steady movement of materials across an enormous landscape. To make that movement reliable, the people of the Indus world used standardized weights. Many were small cubes of stone, polished smooth and shaped according to consistent values. A merchant weighing beads or metal in one city could expect the same measure to be recognized elsewhere. This quiet agreement allowed trade to extend beyond familiar neighbors and personal trust. The stone cube became a shared language of quantity, understood without speech. Balances themselves have rarely survived, but the weights reveal how carefully goods must have been compared. A difference too small to see could matter when the material was valuable. Carnelian, silver, copper, and fine beads carried worth because they required distant travel, skilled labor, or both. Measurement protected exchange and suggests a world in which value could be represented through agreed amounts rather than judged only by appearance. Seals carried another form of trust. The best-known Indus seals were usually carved from steatite, a soft stone that could be cut with fine detail and hardened through firing. Many show a single animal beneath a short row of signs. The so-called unicorn appears most often, though it was not a living creature in the ordinary sense. Bulls, elephants, rhinoceroses, and water buffalo also appear, each rendered with calm precision. A raised boss on the back allowed the seal to be held or worn. Pressed into wet clay, a seal could mark ownership, identify a sender, close a container, or confirm that goods had been inspected. Its exact meaning remains unknown because the script above the animal cannot yet be read. A particular image may have represented a household, profession, trading group, office, or sacred idea. Whatever the system meant, it allowed identity to travel. A sealed package could carry the authority of someone who was not physically present. The designs themselves moved across borders. Indus seals and beads have been found in regions connected to Mesopotamia, while Mesopotamian texts refer to trade with a distant place called Meluha. Most scholars connect that name with the Indus world, though its exact boundaries remain uncertain. Ships may have followed the coast through ports in the Arabian Sea, linking the Indus, Oman, the Persian Gulf, and southern Mesopotamia. Such a voyage demanded knowledge of winds, currents, safe anchorages, and the seasons when the sea was most forgiving. Mesopotamian records mention interpreters associated with Meluha, suggesting that language could become a barrier even when trade remained possible. An Indus merchant arriving in a Western city would have entered a world of different gods, scripts, clothing, and customs. Yet the need to weigh, seal, bargain, and deliver created a practical bridge between strangers. Exchange did not require complete understanding, it required enough shared rules to keep goods moving. Coastal settlements played an important part in this wider world. At places such as Lothal, archaeologists have found workshops, seals, weights, and a large brick-lined basin, often interpreted as a dock or water facility, though its exact purpose remains debated. Whatever function it served, the settlement stood within a landscape shaped by tidal channels and access to the sea. It belonged to the edge where inland production met maritime travel. Trade brought more than wealth. A new tool, decorative style, crop, story, or ritual, could move beside copper and stone. Merchants returned with knowledge of distant places, and foreign objects entered homes where they acquired new meanings. The Indus cities were not silent because they were isolated. They were silent to us despite having participated in one of the ancient world's broadest conversations. The seals and weights preserve that conversation in miniature. A tiny stone cube records an agreement about value. A carved animal carries an identity we can no longer name. Together, they reveal a civilization that knew how to make trust portable. Its merchants could cross rivers, plains, and seas because measurement, craftsmanship, and recognized symbols traveled with them, holding distant lives together long before any map showed the full extent of their world. Section 9. Of all the mysteries left by the Indus civilization, none is more persistent than its script. The signs appear on seals, tablets, pottery, tools, and small objects carried through the cities and trade routes of the ancient world. Some are simple strokes, while others resemble fish, jars, plants, combs, or abstract forms whose meaning has been lost. They usually appear in short sequences, often beside the carved image of an animal. The signs are visible and repeated, yet the language behind them remains beyond our reach. Most known inscriptions are very brief. A seal may contain only a handful of signs, and even the longest surviving sequences are short compared with the tablets of Mesopotamia or the monuments of Egypt. This brevity makes decipherment far more difficult. A long text allows patterns to emerge. Names repeat, grammatical endings become visible, and one passage can be compared with another. The Indus signs offer only fragments. They may record names, titles, places, professions, goods, rituals, or ownership, but each possibility remains uncertain because there is so little text around them. The direction of writing seems to have been most often from right to left, though some examples may have followed different arrangements. Certain signs appear more often at the beginning or end of a sequence, suggesting that position mattered. Some combinations repeat in ways that look structured rather than random. These patterns have encouraged many scholars to believe that the signs represent a true writing system, perhaps one connected to a spoken language now changed or lost. Others argue that the symbols may have functioned more like emblems or administrative signs without recording full speech. The debate continues because the evidence supports more than one interpretation. One of the greatest obstacles is the absence of a bilingual inscription. Egyptian hieroglyphs became readable in part because the Rosetta Stone carried the same message in more than one script. Cuneiform opened through inscriptions that repeated royal texts across several languages. No such key has been found for the Indus signs. A seal recovered in Mesopotamia might carry an Indus image, but it does not provide a translation. Without a known name, a familiar sentence, or a second language beside the first, every proposed reading begins in uncertainty. The spoken language of the civilization is another unanswered question. Some researchers have looked toward early Dravidian languages, while others have considered different language families or the possibility that several languages were spoken across the region. The civilization was so large that merchants, farmers, craftspeople, and officials, separated by hundreds of miles, may not all have spoken in the same way, even if they shared seals, weights, and urban standards. The script may have crossed linguistic boundaries, or it may have belonged to a narrower group within the wider system. Modern technology has added new tools without producing a final solution. Researchers have studied sign frequency, order, repetition, and variation using large collections of inscriptions. Computer models can compare the patterns with known writing systems and test whether the sequences resemble language. These methods have shown that the signs possess order, but order alone does not reveal meaning. Every model depends upon assumptions about what the signs were meant to do. The temptation to claim a solution has been strong. Proposed decipherments have linked the script to many languages, religions, dynasties, and legendary traditions. Some begin with careful evidence, while others force the signs into meanings chosen in advance. A real decipherment must do more than explain one seal. It must work across thousands of examples, produce consistent values, account for repeated patterns, and allow new inscriptions to be read without changing the rules each time. Until that happens, the signs remain suspended between language and silence. We can see that they mattered. They were carved with care, carried on objects of trade and authority, and repeated across the civilization. Someone knew how to make them, and someone else knew how to understand them. A seal pressed into clay may once have announced a name, office, household, shipment, or sacred obligation. To the people of the Indus cities, the message may have been immediate. To us, it is closed. This unread script shapes the way the civilization is remembered. Egypt speaks through royal names and funerary texts. Mesopotamia preserves letters, laws, hymns, and stories. The Indus world offers streets, wells, seals, and measurements without explanation. Its silence is not the absence of thought. It is the survival of thought without a key. The signs remain before us like a door whose outline is clear, whose handle can be touched, and whose room beyond cannot yet be entered. Section 10. The Indus cities reveal careful planning, shared standards, and long traditions of construction, yet they refuse to show us the figure who stood at the center of it all. In Egypt, kings raised monuments carrying their names. In Mesopotamia, rulers carved victories into stone and claimed the favor of the gods. Harappa and Mohenjo-daro offer no comparable throne, royal tomb, or surviving inscription announcing the deeds of a king. This absence has made the civilization seem unusually peaceful or equal, but silence should not be mistaken for proof. Large cities do not maintain streets, weights, workshops, walls, and water systems without authority. Authority in the Indus world may have been expressed through order rather than spectacle. Bricks followed familiar proportions across distant settlements. Weights remained consistent enough for merchants to trust them. Seals repeated recognizable forms, and builders preserved shared ideas about streets, drainage, and domestic space. These patterns suggest institutions capable of maintaining rules across generations. Yet the people who enforced those rules did not leave colossal statues of themselves. Their power may have depended less upon one visible ruler and more upon councils, merchant houses, religious specialists, land-holding families, or several groups whose interests overlapped. Archaeologists have sometimes looked for a priest-king hidden within the ruins. A small carved figure from Mohenjo-daro with a patterned garment and calm expression became famous under that name. Yet nothing proves that he was either priest or king. The title reflects the desire to place a familiar ruler into a civilization that has not offered one clearly. He may represent an elite person, ancestor, sacred image, or something else entirely. Without a readable inscription, even a face preserved in stone cannot tell us who it was meant to be. Religion is equally difficult to recover. Seals show animals, seated figures, trees, and scenes that may have carried sacred meaning. Some have been linked to later traditions, but the distance between the Indus cities and later religious texts is vast. A horned figure among animals has sometimes been described as an early form of Shiva, while female figurines have been called mother goddesses. These ideas are possible but uncertain. A figurine may have been a toy offering ancestor or deity. The image survives, while the name and ritual around it have vanished. What can be said more safely is that the natural world mattered. Bulls, elephants, rhinoceroses, buffalo, and the mysterious unicorn appear repeatedly on seals. Trees were represented with care, and water occupied a central place in homes and public structures. The Great Bath suggests that immersion may have carried ceremonial importance. Fire altars have been proposed at some sites, though their meaning remains debated. The civilization left traces of repeated actions, but not the words that would explain them. Burials offer another quiet view of belief. The dead were sometimes placed with pottery or personal objects, yet the graves discovered so far are modest beside the royal tombs of other ancient civilizations. There are differences in wealth, but no vast cemetery built around a divine monarch. Perhaps status was expressed more strongly during life, or perhaps important rituals left little behind. The lack of royal monuments may have been a choice rather than a failure to build them. Authority can appear through palaces and statues, but it can also hide inside measurements, access, custom, and control over resources. Whoever decided how water was distributed, which seal was accepted, which weight was correct, or where a wall could rise held power even without a crown. The Indus system may have been strong because its rules appeared ordinary, woven into brick, trade, household design, and daily habit. This hidden structure makes the civilization difficult to imagine from the inside. We can see its order without seeing the people who commanded it. We can recognize symbols without knowing whether they named gods, offices, families, or merchants. The cities seem calm because no king is shown crushing enemies beneath his feet. Yet conflict, inequality, punishment, and ambition may simply have been recorded in forms that did not survive. The silence of the Indus world asks us to resist easy answers. It may have been governed by kings who avoided monumental display, by councils whose authority was shared, by merchant elites, or by arrangements that changed from one city to another. The evidence does not allow a single ruler to step forward. What remains is a civilization whose power is visible everywhere and named nowhere, present in the repeated brick, the balanced weight, the sealed package, and the ordered street, but hidden behind the unread signs of those who made the system work. Section 11. The decline of the great Indus cities was once imagined as a sudden ending. Early explanations searched for a single catastrophe powerful enough to empty streets, silence workshops, and leave brick walls to collapse beneath wind and dust. Invasion, flood, and destruction were each offered as final answers, yet the archaeological record has proved more complicated. The urban world did not vanish in one night, and its people did not simply disappear. What changed was the system that had held distant cities, standards, trade routes, and shared practices together. After about 1900 before the Common Era, the mature urban pattern began to weaken. Some large cities lost population, construction became less uniform, and long-distance exchange declined. Standardized weights and seals appeared less often, certain neighborhoods were abandoned or reused, while later buildings were sometimes smaller, and less carefully aligned with earlier streets. The institutions maintaining the old order were losing their reach. The environment was changing at the same time. Monsoon rainfall weakened in parts of the region over a long period, making some rivers and seasonal streams less dependable. Channels shifted across the plains, as they had always done, but communities built around particular routes suffered when water moved away. A river that once fed fields and settlements could shrink or leave an old course dry. Elsewhere, floods repeatedly damaged low ground. The landscape did not deliver one universal disaster. It created different pressures in different places. For a large city, even a gradual reduction in reliable water could become serious. Urban populations depended upon food from surrounding farms, and those farms depended upon rainfall, river flow, and labor. Weaker harvests reduced what villages could send to the city. Families may have moved towards smaller settlements where water and farmland were easier to reach. Merchants could find that long journeys no longer brought the same profit if production declined or distant markets weakened. The city could continue while becoming less able to support its former scale. Trade with Mesopotamia changed as well. Western kingdoms rose and fell, political routes shifted, and demand for distant goods was never permanent. The Indus cities had benefited from a broad commercial world, but connection created vulnerability as well as wealth. When exchange became less reliable, workshops producing goods for distant markets may have lost part of their purpose. Merchants adapted, but the old network no longer carried materials and authority with the same strength. There is little evidence for a single conquering army sweeping across the civilization. Human remains once interpreted as victims of massacre do not support the old story of one violent destruction. The idea of invasion offered a dramatic conclusion, but it explained too little. Conflict may have occurred, as it does in nearly every society, yet the weakening of the urban system appears to have been slower and more uneven. Mohenjo-daro may have faced repeated flooding and the burden of maintaining buildings raised upon older debris. Harappa remained occupied, though its neighborhoods and material culture changed. Other settlements declined, while new communities grew farther east or in different ecological zones. Population did not drain into emptiness, it redistributed. People carried skills, crops, animals, pottery traditions, and memories into places where the old city plan was no longer necessary. This movement changes the meaning of collapse. From the viewpoint of a monumental city, the end of standardized construction and distant trade looks like decline. From the viewpoint of a family moving toward more reliable water, it may have been adaptation. The urban order weakened, but life continued through smaller communities whose remains are less dramatic and easier to overlook. Civilization did not end when the streets became quiet. It changed scale. The unread script also faded during this transformation. Seals became less common, inscriptions shortened or disappeared, and the habits they supported no longer held the same place. Perhaps the signs lost meaning as the institutions that taught and used them dissolved. Without long texts or later copies, the script passed beyond recovery, leaving us with symbols separated from the voices that once understood them. The great cities did not die from one wound. Their decline emerged from pressures that met across generations. Water became less predictable, exchange weakened, populations shifted, and the shared urban system lost the strength to reproduce itself in the old form. No single moment marked the end. A drain went unrepaired, a workshop closed, a family left, and a street grew quieter. Slowly, the city became a memory while its people carried life elsewhere. Section 12. The Indus cities have now receded into the distance, but their silence remains unlike any other we have encountered in this book. Egypt left names carved into stone. Mesopotamia preserved laws, letters, hymns, and stories in clay. The people of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro built streets, wells, drains, workshops, and houses with extraordinary care, then left behind a script that still refuses to speak. Their civilization is not unknown because it lacked order or memory. It is unknown because the key to that memory has not survived. Across the plains, the old cities were never isolated monuments. They depended upon farmers, herders, craftspeople, merchants, builders, and families whose work joined one settlement to another. Standard bricks allowed walls to follow familiar proportions. Cubed weights allowed strangers to agree upon value. Seals carried identities across distance, while river routes connected the Indus world to lands beyond its own horizon. The civilization's strength rested upon coordination hidden inside measurements, habits, and repeated forms. Its greatest achievements were practical rather than theatrical. Water could be drawn from wells close to home. Used water could leave through drains beneath streets. Houses turned inward around courtyards, protecting private life from the noise and dust outside. Workshops produced beads, pottery, metal tools, and cloth, while merchants carried these objects toward the sea and westward into Mesopotamia. The cities were human places shaped by routine, skill, and dependence. Yet the people who organized this world remain difficult to see. No king steps forward from a royal tomb. No victory inscription names the ruler who commanded the walls to rise. Authority may have belonged to several groups, or it may have been expressed through institutions that did not depend upon monuments. Power could have lived in the control of water, trade, standards, land, ritual, or access to knowledge. The absence of a visible throne only makes its structure harder to recover. The unread signs deepen the mystery. They appear on seals and small objects with enough repetition to suggest order, but not enough length to reveal their language. Someone knew how to carve them, and someone else knew how to read them. A short line may once have named a person, office, household, shipment, or sacred obligation. To those who used it, the meaning may have been immediate. To us, the marks remain closed, preserving evidence of thought without allowing that thought to return. When the mature cities changed after about 1900 before the Common Era, their people did not vanish. Rainfall weakened in some regions, rivers shifted, trade routes altered, and the great urban system lost the strength that had held it together. Families moved, settlements became smaller, and older standards faded. What appears from a distance as collapse was also adaptation. Life continued beyond the walls, carrying crops, craft traditions, stories, and customs into new places, even as the old cities grew quiet. The Indus world should not be remembered only as a lost civilization. It was not erased in a single night, and its people were not swallowed by the earth. Communities continued living across the region, though the path between ancient and later traditions remains difficult to trace. The cities faded, but the knowledge within them changed form and moved with people into histories that no longer carried the names Harappa or Mohenjo-daro. What survives beneath the dust is enough to make the silence meaningful. A worn threshold preserves the path of countless feet. A drain reveals concern for the life of a household. A bead records hours of skilled labor, and a small stone weight preserves an agreement between strangers. These objects remind us that history is not made only from kings and battles. It is also made from water carried home, grain measured fairly, walls repaired, children taught, and streets kept usable from one generation to the next. The 5th chapter of our 3rd book has brought us through one of the ancient world's least understood civilizations. We have followed its rivers, entered its cities, stood beside its wells, examined its seals, and watched its urban world slowly transform. The questions remain, but they are not empty. They are surrounded by brick, craft, trade, water, and the evidence of lives lived with purpose. In the next chapter, our journey will cross into another ancient world where stone rose above the forest and temples climbed toward the sky. We will enter the landscapes of early Mesoamerica, where the Olmec, the Maya, and those who came before them shaped cities beneath the jungle canopy, watched the heavens, and carved memory into monuments of their own. The silent streets of the Indus now fall behind us, and somewhere far across the world, another civilization is waiting beneath the leaves. The fifth chapter of the Book of Ancient Worlds has now come to an end. The silent cities have faded once more beneath dust, river, and time. There is nothing more you need to follow or remember tonight. Let the music carry you gently towards sleep. Allow the streets of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro to grow distant as your thoughts become slower, softer, and still. Rest well, seekers. Good night.